All right, so let's continue. Any questions? We'll leave the last two for the end. Any questions from the audience to our speakers, to any of our speakers?
Yeah, and it's disappointing right now. And I just got back from Tallahassee on Tuesday, and we did a rally for Big Sugar. Was supposed to sell the state of Florida some environmentally sensitive lands that would take the overflow from Lake Okeechobee and allow it to filter and naturally treat the water. I don't know if you guys remember 5 years ago when the big sugar companies had all these great, wonderful ads about they're doing their part for their environment, they're doing all this. They're not doing it. And it's a binding contract that they have with the state. The thing is, though, that the representatives and senators that are in Tallahassee right now are not approving that funding to be appropriate for that contract. So, and it expires May 1st. So if they don't act on it. So yeah, there was that option. And also Amendment 1 that we all voted for, or at least 79.9% of Orange County and 74.9% of the state of Florida passed that amendment to the Constitution to protect and acquire sensitive lands to prevent tragedies or to save our historical lands. And that the dock stamps on how that's paid for is through real estate. Every sale has dock stamps that are assessed. That funding is over $700 million that was supposed to be going. So far, they've only appropriated $57 million. That's pathetic. That's pathetic. So a call to action for everybody in this room or that's here today is call your representatives and senators and ask them to, one, fund the acquisition of the land that was already agreed on by all parties, and two, to prevent the abuse or the lack of funding for Amendment 1. We really, in politics, it's really rare to get anybody to agree at 74%. So it was a clear message to the people in Tallahassee. They need to listen to how we voted. Yeah, the technology is not there yet. It's the only thing that I've heard about that is that they're doing in Brevard County, they're testing, and it's a really unique facility that's trying to hone it to where it would be economically feasible. And I know we hear that all the time, and it's really depressing. But unless you're going to have people that are going to be spending millions of dollars to create basically a new economic energy source, you're going to have to make it profitable for someone. Sure, my pleasure.
So we have a question that was written down. How might bad publicity of GMOs affect farmers in the United States?
How might bad publicity
of GMOs affect the farmers?
For the farmers that are currently growing GMOs?
Yes.
Well, that's a really good question. It's going to be a very big struggle. I mean, I'll just be honest, to get back, because we've come so far. I feel like we're very deep. As I was saying, 80% of the food in your grocery store is genetically modified. 90% of the corn is. It's going to be tough because a lot of these farmers have signed on to this, and that's where they get their stuff from. That's where they get their seeds, and people are going to have to take a loss to reverse this. I think it's just the blunt truth about it, because it's the same idea with ourselves, doing it ourselves. Right now organic food's a little more expensive depending on how you buy it, and it can be, but I'm willing to spend that extra dollar at the store to put something good inside of me instead of pay for it down the road. And I've got to pay the price a little bit out of my paycheck to eat healthier, which is a little bit of a struggle. But unfortunately, it's probably going to be the farmers that have to bite the bullet and, I guess, escape the hands of Monsanto to get back to the old ways. But it's going to be an uphill battle.
Could I add something to that? I was listening to NPR, and they were saying about the drought in California, and that because of the demand for organic food, and because of the corn production, that they cannot keep up with the organic corn production to feed the cows that produce organic milk in California. So I couldn't believe when I heard that how they're filling that gap is to import corn from Romania. I thought, what about the carbon footprint on that? You've got arable land here, but instead it's going to be cheaper, and because they don't have to deal with the GMO issue, that they're going to grow this, put this on a boat, on a ship, and ship it all the way to California to feed the cows to get organic milk. That to me just doesn't make sense. It's those type of decisions that should be so obvious that we can't sustain growing food like that, and the transportation and the carbon footprint on top of, maybe if those farmers were able to opt out of these GMO-driven Monsanto monopoly, that maybe we could grow corn that is pretty simple to grow here instead of getting it from Romania.
Any other questions?
You were mentioning how it comes out of each paycheck, like for organic food.
Mm-hmm.
What are the people who don't have a big enough paycheck for that?
Exactly. It's even tougher for people because I tell some people, just start buying organic food, and if it's even harder for them, then you've got to just really take small steps. I mean, doing what you can is really all you can do. Nobody's going to be perfect. I host this march, but I'm not going to sit up here and say that I haven't eaten a GMO since I started working with the movement, because that's a lie. I mean, it's everywhere, and you can say it's hypocritical, but you can just do what you can. Be conscious of it, and a simple step that I started to do was what you drink. I really only drink water for the most part, or like an organic tea like this. So every time I would go to lunch with my parents or take a lunch at work, I quit getting that soda, quit getting that the tea with all that sugar in it. Or your condiments is another good one. If you just go home and switch out your ketchup, that's the first ingredient on your ketchup is probably high fructose corn syrup, and go grab an organic ketchup from Whole Foods or Chamberlain's. So little things like that are going to help. You just really got to do what you can. Not everybody's going to be in the position to do it, but also, once we start doing little things, each and every one of us, that will bring the prices down, because there will be more demand for organic products. So hopefully we reach that tipping point, and it will become more accessible and affordable for all of us.
I think one important point that you just mentioned, when there's enough demand for organic, okay, it will help the farmers. It will keep more money in the pocket of the farmers rather than one company. And when one company today becomes a monopoly on our food, okay, it's not going to sit and keep prices low. Eventually, they're going to raise prices on all of us, and that's when we will realize we have been, taken to the bank, because all these farmers who are resisting, they are going out of business. Eventually, these companies will control the market, and once they have full control of the market, then we are at their mercy in terms of prices. So we will say now $1 is too much to pay, but it will be multiple dollars, just like the oil cartel. I mean, if individual countries were selling oil in the market, it probably would be cheap. But when they have oil cartel where, they raised prices to over $100 last summer, and now it's less than $50, and you say, is it based on production cost? No, it's based on control of supply and demand, and now that's the ultimate goal they have, is to control supply. Then the price elasticity is gone. And we will pay a lot more than $1.
When I was a youngster growing up in Missouri, land was divided up in squares, 1 mile squares, so they called it a section, 640 acres. And most of the farmers had, 80 acres, 120 acres, but, there were quite a few farms in a section of land, so much so that they built a little schoolhouse right at the corner of the intersection of 4 sections of land. And in that schoolhouse, there would be enough children, to come to that school. What does this have to do with what we're talking about? Well, the thing is now the farmers are farming 2,000 acres or 3,000 acres or 5,000 acres. And so the only people who might possibly live out there, all the old homesteads are gone, and the only people who might live there are just a few people who like the idea of country living, and they've got an acre or 2. Okay, but what will happen is that organic farming will become a much smaller operation. You're not going to go in there and farm organically in the same way you do with all the mechanization and commercialization. So it will actually put more people back into the country, where they are living a different kind of life than they currently live. I mean, 100 years ago, or at the time of the Depression anyway, way more than 50% of the U.S. population lived in the country, and now less than 10% of the U.S. population lives in the country. And we've become a very urbanized society as opposed to agrarian. And so not only would we get better food if more people were, living in that way, but we would also probably have a more wholesome lifestyle because of the way we live.
All right, we have one last question. How does the panel see the effects of GMOs with the increase of the population globally?
No, me first. Okay. Monsanto and the companies that produce the GMOs, that they have such a corner on the market, and I think what you were saying, that you've gone so far to where it is a monopoly, and they manipulate the way that business is done in the agriculture business. But it all starts with us and our personal responsibility. If you start with one tomato plant and you just don't grow, or you just don't buy any tomatoes, I mean, they taste awful anyway if you get them from Publix. They're genetically modified so they can withstand being bumped around and shipped, and they never really get red. Grow your own. That is the biggest thing you could do, so you don't ever have to buy another tomato within season. There's a million different things, and you don't need a huge piece of land to make your own personal difference. You can grow beans, you can grow a whole bunch of things, even just on a little patio. So I think that having that personal responsibility and start with that, I think that's the biggest thing that we can do right now.
I want to second that before coming back to you. When we were in grade school, elementary school, we had actually the school, we didn't have a green terrain like this. We had, each student had a piece of land marked in his or her name, and throughout the year we were farming that land, planting things in them, learning how to do it. And today we see these great spaces here that we keep putting fertilizer and then bringing the lawnmower to cut them. We never had lawnmowers. We had cows and sheep and goats. They mowed the lawn and they fertilized it, So nature has its own way to do this. And like here on your campus, I think it would be a great initiative if this class will take it to the leadership at Seminole State College and say, we want to turn part of these open spaces into places where students can grow things. Okay. Excellent. I mean, that's wonderful. How about turning all these green spaces into something that's actually useful? And instead of just grass that we keep spending money fertilizing it, and once it grows, we spend money to cut it down and enlarge the footprint. So we have to think of new ways. Everything is available to us. Sorry.
He pretty much hit the nail on the head right there. The idea of us just trying to do a little bit ourselves. You know, you can hear scary statistics about the population growing and all that, but most people are crammed into major areas, and you know, if we're getting our food from one source, and there's so many people in the world, and that population is increasing. I mean, why don't we just spread the food around a little bit to where it's coming from? I mean, just imagine if 3, 4, or 5 of your neighbors had gardens, and you all were, you know, bartering a couple vegetables or maybe some other things, like, you know, you were saying the dry cleaning for the, I think it was for the
eggs.
For the eggs. If everybody had a garden in their neighborhood or on their school property, I mean, we would have less food costs, less waste. People would get fed. I mean, you could do things like feed homeless people with the leftovers. I mean, there's tons of alternatives, and I think the route we're going with the GMOs and the monopoly of that system is not going to look good when the population increases, whether it's a scary increase or not. I think it's the change comes from us doing a little bit of what we can locally together.
There's a book that was written about 40 years ago by a guy named E.F. Schumacher. So it was written a long time ago, but I think it's still very pertinent. And he called it "Small is Beautiful," and he advocated the idea of keeping things down to very small sizes and simplicity, where we harness an appropriate technology, but where we don't go just crazy about technology. And so, like I said, it's an old book. You can find it in the library. E.F. Schumacher, "Small is Beautiful."
I want to deal with the myth of that the world population got to a point that we cannot feed them except through GMO project. And I want to say that's totally false. Millions of tons of food and grains are dumped in oceans because the companies don't want them to enter the market because they want to control price at a certain level. They don't give it to poor countries, and they don't let it come into the market to bring prices down. They just destroy it. And that is a tragedy. So there's plenty of food around. And there are, you know, millions of acres that are not being utilized, turning into deserts in many places. It's because either you have to follow their system, or they're going to fight you tooth and nail not to allow you to thrive. They don't want competition. So I don't believe that God, who created this beautiful earth, didn't have in mind that at some point we will get to 7 billion or 10 billion or 20 billion. I'm for science to how to better utilize the land, but not to control, you know, the food supply of the world population by 1 or 2 or half a dozen companies. So that propaganda is where we have to fight first, to bring the facts and not to allow the propaganda of these companies to control our mindset to say this is the only way of the future to feed the world, the growing world population.
All right. Well, that ends the question-answer period. Help me thank the speakers once again for their insight.